to another edition of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, Jon Fetherston, and on tonight's program, we're joined by a candidate running for United States Senate, potentially against Elizabeth Warren, John Deaton. John Deaton is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and an outsider who was born into a generational poverty in Detroit, Michigan. As the only member of his family to graduate from high school, John Deaton has worked his way through college, overcome cancer, and eventually got a law degree from New England School of Law. For the last 20 years, John Deaton has fought and successfully represented cancer victims against Fortune 500 companies. So with that, John Deaton, welcome to All Politics is Local. Thanks for taking a couple minutes to join us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for stepping up. You know, anybody who runs for office, Republican, Democrat, Independent, we have the utmost respect for anybody here on All Politics is Local, because as the name of the program is, all politics is local. And what happens in a local election on the state level is much more important in this program's opinion than what happens in the federal level. But a lot of the stuff that you can make a difference on up in Washington flows back down to the local level from the federal level. So let's talk a little bit about what your campaign is all about and what you're hoping to accomplish.
Well, sure. And first, let me just say my eventual opponent, Elizabeth Warren, should learn the lesson that you just talked about, because I think if she paid more attention to local politics and what's happening in the Commonwealth, maybe we'd see a lot better results than we're seeing from the federal government. But listen, my campaign, I got in this race, John, because I felt compelled. When you learn my story, I really do represent and embody the American dream and everything that's possible in a great free country. And I don't recognize that country. And I fear that the dream that I represent is dying. And I do question, could a kid from Springfield or Brockton or Roxbury, could they do what I did, 35, 40 years ago? Because when you look at what's going on, we have multiple crises, illegal immigration out of control in the state. We have an inflation and cost of living problem, housing crisis. We have opioid addictions. We have a debt crisis, and we have foreign wars, and the world slipping in chaos. But the greatest crisis of all, John, is a crisis of leadership in Washington, D.C. The career elites like Elizabeth Warren sit back, they fuel division amongst us so that they can stay in power. And when you look at the Senate, you don't see someone like me who's overcome poverty, who struggled to pay his bills in his early 40s, was doing everything right, but still feeling that sensation that you're drowning in debt and you can't seem to get ahead. I understand those struggles because I've lived through them, and I think we need someone like that in the Senate.
Let's take a minute and break down, because you said a lot there, and a lot of it sounds really good. If you're I have two young adult children, about 25 and 26, and I look at their lives at 25 and 26 and compare it to mine. And the American dream was always to have the next generation have a better life than what the current generation has. I don't see that going forward with like my kids and maybe other people's kids. And I have to say to myself, is that the doing of the government?
Yeah, listen, I think that one of the many differences between me and Elizabeth Warren is she sees the government as a solution. I see the government as a problem. But I have a 24-year-old daughter, a 22-year-old daughter, and a 5-year-old daughter. And part of that compulsion to run was the fear of that American dream dying. As you said, the American dream was about your children being able to have an opportunity to do better than you could. And what we're seeing is what I call the reverse of the American dream. Kids nowadays, for example, we talked about housing briefly. Now kids can't afford, 25, 30-year-old can't afford a home. And you have the parents taking out mortgages to give down payments for their kids so that they can have a home. And that's the reverse. And that's just one small example.
I mean, when a 25-year-old kid who's making $25 an hour, it sounds like, oh, you're doing okay. But then, you're paying $2,500 a month for your rent. You're going to the grocery store and you're filling up at the gas tank. There's nothing left at the end of the day to save for that future home that you want everybody to have. So, I mean, what part does Elizabeth Warren and the rest of the federal government play in all of that?
Well, listen, first of all, when you print 80% of all US dollars in the last 3.5 years, to put this in perspective, January 2020, there were 4 trillion US dollars in circulation. Now, 4 years later, there's 20 trillion in circulation. When you debase your currency to that extent, you're going to experience inflation. And when you experience inflation, you experience permanent price increases. So even if inflation comes down, the prices don't. And it starts pricing regular people out of the economy. We have a $35 trillion debt. Personal credit card debts at 1.2 trillion with delinquencies at an all-time high. 40 to 50% of Americans don't have $500 set aside in case of an emergency. I mean, we're going off a cliff if we don't get good leadership. And it's because of people like Elizabeth Warren who just keep kicking that can. She thinks that we can just print our way out of it, or her one-trick answer to every problem we face is tax the rich and the wealthy. There's just not enough. You can't tax your way out of this problem, and you can't cut spending enough out of this problem. This is what a lot of people don't understand, and even some conservatives. Even if you cut all discretionary spending in our country, we will still be at a deficit, because when you count mandatory spending as Social Security, military benefits, Medicare, defense, you're at a deficit already before you get into any other type of social programs or anything like that. So you can't cut enough, you can't tax enough, you have to grow the economy. And so we need elected leaders who understand that concept and are going to, not hurt American jobs and American innovation. And I think Elizabeth Warren she's the epitome of kind of strangle technology and innovation in this country.
So, the debt service in the United States is going to become the biggest line item in our budget. And I don't think the common folk understands that. But more importantly, I don't think Republicans and Democrats, even in the Senate and the House, understand that. How can you change that mentality when you get into the Senate?
Well, first, lead by example. And another thing is, one of the first bills I'm going to support are term limits. Because what happens is they get into Washington, D.C., and everything becomes about staying in power. And if you have term limits, then you got 12 years as United States Senator to get in there, try to do the best job you can, and then get out. And when you don't have to worry about another election and maintaining the agenda that is being set by your party leaders, you don't have to be loyal to that. You're just loyal to America and Massachusetts. I think it's going to be one of the first steps necessary. But I think I don't know how many elected leaders know that we spend more to service our national debt than we do on national defense. That is a shocking number. When you count all the military spending and all the payrolls for our service members and all the weaponry, and you count all that, it doesn't even come close to how much we pay on interest.
Scary, isn't it?
It's shocking.
Massachusetts is the only state in the entire country that has the right to shelter law in Massachusetts. And I will tell you, when that law was first drafted, by Governor Dukakis back then, it was a good thing. Help a pregnant woman who's homeless, who unfortunately had maybe a husband or a boyfriend who was abusive, and, gave a mother a safe place to, have a baby and everything. It was made with good intentions. Our current governor, Maura Healey, my words, has misinterpreted the law, and now has turned them into what was commonly referred to now as the Healey hotels with the immigration problem. Do you have any thoughts on the immigration crisis here in Massachusetts and how it affects the Commonwealth?
Oh my goodness! Now there's a lot to talk about. I feel so strongly about it. I went to the border to investigate it myself and talk to border security. But before that, let me first agree with you. When you think about the right to shelter law conceptually, and you think about a situation where, let's say, there's a car accident that kills the father and the husband, and you have a mom of 3 or 4 children who now can't afford the mortgage and get kicked out. It is a noble thought for your local government to support one of their own in a temporary catastrophic situation. I don't believe the state legislature, when that bill was enacted, envisioned a completely open southern border where everyone would pour here. So I agree with you. It's a noble act. But listen, I went to the border when they took the rec center, because my first year of law school, I lived in Roxbury. I'm from the inner city of Detroit. And when they took the rec center from the poor kids, it kind of hit home at me because I know the real danger for those kids in their city is idleness. You take away their sports and their structure and those types of things, good coaches who are coaching them and keeping them off the street, they make bad decisions because that's the way life is. And so I said to the campaign, let's go to the border, went to the border. John, I can't tell you how bad it is. They have bus stops, de facto bus stops along the border. The migrants do not run. They wait to get picked up. They have no identification. You don't know if their name is correct, if there's where they're claiming they're from is correct. And within 24 hours, they are released. And John, they're given a court date 8 years from now, 2032, when I was there in May, 2033. They wouldn't likely show up 8 weeks later, 8 years later, and then they're released. And it's about math, John. I learned that the actual number is about 12 million when you count getaways. 12 million people have crossed, undocumented, unknown individuals. Even if you and I assume, which I think we probably do, that the vast majority, in fact, let's take 99%. 99% are good people who want a good life. Even if only 1 out of 100 is a potential bad guy, that's 120,000 bad guys. Now, God forbid, if my assumption is wrong and it's 95% are good people with good intentions and 5% are bad, you're at 600,000 bad guys that walk through the back door. We know what 14 terrorists did to America on 9/11. And I learned that out of the 117 countries represented in the Yuma crossing alone, it includes 15 countries that sponsor terrorism, that want to kill America, to hurt America, to destroy America. So we have people coming across the border that might be in one of those hotels you're talking about, being fed by the American taxpayer while they're planning our demise. If that doesn't anger you as an American, I don't know what could. And frighten you, not just anger you.
Well, another thing that you can't put a price tag on. What's the price of a good teacher who leaves the system because she is a teacher in a right to shelter community and she's stressed out for a job because she just had 30 new students placed into her classroom that don't speak the language that she teaches? Or what's the price of a cop who says, you know what, I don't need this anymore, I can retire, and you lose that senior leadership in your local police department and everything. So it has a lot of downstream effects that I don't even think people, and you can't put a price tag on, but people aren't even thinking about those consequences as well, too. So, I mean, though, and it goes back to all politics is local. It affects your school system, it protects your public safety officials, and God forbid, like you said, something goes wrong.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of times people just look at the bottom line, which is pretty hefty. They're talking between $1 and $2 billion in hard dollars. But you're bringing up an excellent point, which is you're stressing out the infrastructure of our society. Fall River Police Department's had a 700% increase in calls. The urgent care rooms are overpacked. And a lot of people know about the right to shelter law, but coupled with the right to shelter law is a right to educate. Mm-hmm. And what you said, you have students now who are in classrooms that don't understand English, that are holding back the class and stressing out the teachers and the communities. So it is a absolute disaster that we're facing right now. And we have poor leadership. And Elizabeth Warren, the federal government has to be involved. And Elizabeth Warren not only objected to the bipartisan immigration bill, which wasn't good enough, but it stopped some bleeding. She even objected to President Biden's 2,500 per day cap on illegal migrants. So her silence, and the only time she's spoken up, John, is to object to any type of cap on these migrants coming through the border, I think says a lot about how she's not in tune with everything politics is local.
So what is Senator Warren doing? I mean, the projections are $1 billion a year. I will tell you that it's much more than that, and kind of the, down the stream things that we talk. So what is Elizabeth Warren doing to try to offset that cost for Massachusetts? I'm not seeing anything. You are pay more attention to what she does, so.
No, no. Listen, what she's doing is being a national celebrity, a national personality. She's out there, helping the vice president campaign. She's out there giving speeches. Listen, we learned when in think it was 2019-ish, it could have been 2018-ish, that the Army Corps of Engineers declared the two Cape Cod bridges as functional obsolete. Governor Baker, a Republican, was trying to get money for it. These are federally owned bridges. She wouldn't help. She wouldn't help because he's a Republican. You can't give a Republican any type of victory. Then the infrastructure bill was passed. $110 billion in that bill went to bridges across America. Massachusetts didn't get $1 for those bridges, and so that's another example of how she's really doing nothing for Massachusetts. And I think the voters are craving for somebody who is going to realize what your whole program is that all politics is local. And you've got to pay attention to what's happening in the local communities that impact the citizens who are voting for you. And I think the only good news is that Elizabeth Warren has been so bad. She's only passed one bill as primary sponsor in 12 years. You or I get fired if we have that lack of productivity at work, and I'm hoping the voters agree with me that she deserves to be fired.
One of the reasons why you raise your family and put up with the high cost of living in the Northeast in Massachusetts is because we've always had great education and we've had great health care. But now we have hospitals going out of business in Massachusetts. Somebody running for U.S. Senate, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's another example. Listen, Elizabeth Warren has been vocal now after the bankruptcies, and that's what she always does. It's all about reacting. But, what we need to do is, her solution, of course, is well, you can't have any private equity involved in hospitals and let the government take over. And of course, that's not a solution. But what we need to do is have an oversight and guardrails in place, and the government can check in to see if there's transparency being met, if certain guardrails and thresholds are being met before we get to this place. And so the problem is we have elected leaders who have never run a business, whether it's a small business or a large business, and don't have enough real world experience. All they know how is to spend money of the taxpayer in useless ways. And I think Elizabeth Warren is the queen of that.
So you are running on the Republican side. You're running in the primaries coming up on September 3rd. And we always say here on All Politics is Local, if you don't vote, you don't get a chance to complain. You do have other opponents in the primary. Let's talk a little bit about your race for the primary. And then more importantly, after the primary, what the goal will be to get to the finish line in November.
Sure. Well, listen, I'm confident. I'm not taking anything for granted, but I'm confident that I'll be the Republican nominee. We had a first debate was sponsored by the Norfolk County GOP. It was after the debate, there was a straw poll of over 200 voters, Republican and unenrolled. I'm proud to say I got 79% of the vote. Quite humbling. 2 nights later, on August 8th, we had a debate hosted by iHeart Studios and Jeff Cooner. The poll afterwards showed that me at 83%. So I think that I'm very positive that the Republicans are coming together. They see that I have a shot, right? That there's a chance. She has a 41, when I say she, Elizabeth Warren has a 41% approval rating. She's passed one bill in 12 years. She finished third when she ran for president in the Democratic primary. She's not that very popular. A poll showed that Governor Baker, if he were to run, would crush her by 15 points. And there's a lot of people getting excited, John, about this candidacy. In fact, I went to get my mail on Friday, and there was a flyer that said, "Meet John Deaton," candidate John Deaton, and I had nothing to do with it. So there's an outside entity that got inspired by my candidacy that's out there supporting me. And I think that she is beatable, and I think we're going to prove it. So I'm looking forward to it.
So September 4th, when, you know, you're the candidate to run officially against Elizabeth Warren, is she going to debate you?
Well, listen, she debated Jeff Deal twice. She debated Scott Brown twice. I think 2 debates are baked in, but I'm going to challenge her to at least a third debate. I want to do 5. I'm going to do 5 or 6 in the primary with the 2 other candidates. I'm hoping that she'll agree to 5, but I'm going to really push for at least a third debate because and she's already talking a lot about me, John. She's sending emails about me. She made a joke about me on St. Patrick's Day. She tweeted about me on the day that I announced because Senator Warren's never faced someone. You know, to give you an example, for 22 years in the Commonwealth, I've represented asbestos victims that get cancer and lung cancer, you know, from New Bedford, Fall River, and the Cape all the way to Pittsfield, every place in between against major corporations. In fact, I fought Travelers Insurance for 22 years. Elizabeth Warren tried to help asbestos victims by representing Travelers Insurance. So it just gives you an idea of who really represents the little guy, me or her. You know, she wants to talk about income inequality. It's not a political slogan for me. It lives inside my heart. Something I'm very passionate about is uplifting poor people like I was in this country. And my approach is certainly different than hers. And I think that people are going to I think they're ready for an approach that uplifts people, like uplifts the poor and expand the middle class. That doesn't mean you have to tear down other people to do it.
Just to put in a shameless plug, as the newspaper industry slowly, unfortunately, is dying in Massachusetts and all around the country and the rest of the world, a lot of people get their news from community media. So if Elizabeth Warren takes you up on the offer for more debates, community media would love to host the debate because I think it's a good way to reach voters and, you know, an active voting base. So we'll put in a shameless plug for that.
Listen, and I'll agree. And even if she doesn't, after the primary and even after I win, you can bet I'll be back on your show.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about your military background and your passion for that and what you'll bring to the Senate for that.
Yeah, you know, it's my path is pretty interesting. My brother dropped out of high school and worked 3 years. When he was 17, my mother signed. He joined the Air Force. I was forced to drop out of high school. After the first day, I had a gun shoved in my mouth. So like everyone else, I was a high school dropout with my family, but finally I found a tiny high school and I worked my way through private school and then college and law school. And when I was in law school, New England School of Law, I became overcome with pride. I realized I'm going to be a licensed attorney. I knew I was going to make money eventually. And I just realized I'm the American dream. So I joined the Marine Corps, and it was pretty competitive because in 1992, the movie A Few Good Men came out with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, Demi Moore, and all that, Kevin Bacon, and everyone wanted to get in the JAG Corps, you know, Judge Advocate General. And so I let everyone know I couldn't afford Harvard Law, but I beat out Harvard, BC, BU, Suffolk, and the Marine Corps chose me to represent the Commonwealth for the 1994 Judge Advocate Law contract. Spent 7 years of active duty. I was a Special Assistant United States Attorney, federal prosecutor. There's a picture of me, John, on active duty in my camouflage uniform, and there's a whole bunch of drugs on the table because I was in charge of busting Marines were being used by the cartel to smuggle drugs across the southern border at Yuma. And so I was involved in operations where we would stop that. And so it's ironic that all these years later, when I went to the border, I went back to Yuma and it's so much worse. And so I was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal by the President of the United States while I was on active duty. I'm very proud of that service. I may have stayed in, but during a training exercise, I got injured, had a couple of spinal surgeries, and the Marine Corps, my days of packing a 80-pound backpack and humping 20 miles were over, and the Marine Corps retired me.
Well, it sounds like you certainly served with honor and, and an American hero. So thank you for that.
Thank
Real quick, I mean, how does one misrepresent their war record when they're running for vice president?
Listen, if you ever look at my interviews and people bring up my service, and sometimes I say I got injured, I always say I got injured, not in combat. Like I always qualify that. And I'll be honest with you, John, my campaign one time said, why do you keep saying that? Like, you got injured, John, you were an active duty. I go, because I never want to my injury to be compared to someone who was in a war combat zone with bullets were going down range. I never want to be equated to someone whose injury came from that. It's just a matter of fundamental pride and honor and respect. And so there's certain things you just don't do. And, if I were out here walking around pretending that I got hurt in combat and that's why I got retired, then I would be a disgrace. But I don't do that.
John Deaton, we never have enough time here on All Politics is Local. Time goes fast. So give the voters, take a minute and tell the voters of Massachusetts why they should vote for you coming up on September 3rd to run for United States Senate.
They should vote for me because I'm a nonpartisan person who has one test. Is it good for Massachusetts and America? If it is, I'll be all for it. If it's not good for this state, if it's not good for America, I won't support it. And when you get with me, you get loyalty to country first and foremost, and I won't be compromised by a party or an agenda, a person or anyone. It'll be that loyalty to voters and the voters who actually elected me and sent me to the U.S. Senate. And I hope they consider me because it would be a great honor to represent them.
John, how do people learn more about your campaign?
Go to JohnDeaton4Senate.com. It's JohnDeaton for Senate.com. They can volunteer, they can donate, they want to get signs, we get them signs, anything they want to do. I'd love to have them join because we're really building a lot of momentum. We really are. And I think that's why the 79% voters in the first straw poll and the 83% after that, I think people are getting excited. We can retire Elizabeth Warren.
And you can find John Deaton on Facebook, Twitter.
Oh, yeah. On Twitter, on X, it's John E. Deaton 1. John E. Deaton 1. That's primarily my social media outlet, but I'm also on Facebook, not so much on Instagram, but Facebook. John E. Deaton 1 is on X.
Well, John Deaton, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time and joining us here on All Politics is Local. The primary is September 3rd. You can vote for, Republican and Democrat, but if you don't vote, you don't get an opportunity to complain. John's stepping up and is running for office. Go out and support him, learn more about his campaign. I'm Jon Fetherston. You've been watching All Politics is Local. We'll talk again real soon.